So today I'm going to read a couple of passages from the book Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. Now this book was published in 1961. It's become quite a classic in contemporary literature ever since. And like actually a lot of contemporary novels, it's a war novel. But unlike a lot of contemporary war novels, it's not about death. It's a dark comedy, really. It's not about the weight and, the other major war novel I can think of is The Things They Carried, which talks a lot about just how heavy the topic of war is, and Catch-22 sort of does the opposite. It makes light of it. It's both a war novel but also a black comedy and a satire, really. So anyone who enjoys this sort of quirky, satirical sort of humor that pokes fun at the establishment is really gonna like this book. So let me read a bit from the back. Catch-22 is like no other novel. It is one of the funniest books ever written, a keystone work in American literature, and even added a new term to the dictionary, which is Catch-22. At the heart of Catch-22 resides the incomparable, malingering bombardier Yossarian, a hero endlessly inventive in his schemes to save his skin from the horrible chances of war. His efforts are perfectly understandable because as he furiously scrambles, thousands of people he hasn't even met are trying to kill him. His problem is Colonel Cathcart, who keeps raising the number of missions the men must fly to complete their service. Yet, if Yossarian makes any attempts to excuse himself from the perilous missions that he is committed to flying, he is trapped by the Great Loyalty Oath Crusade, the hilariously sinister bureaucratic rule from which the book takes its title. A man is considered insane if he willingly continues to fly dangerous combat missions, but if he makes the necessary formal request to be relieved of such missions, the very act of making the request proves that he is sane and therefore ineligible to be relieved. Catch-22 is a microcosm of the 20th century world as it might look to someone dangerously sane, a masterpiece of our time. So, I am first going to read that passage, the passage that is referenced on the back, and the passage from which the title takes its name, and probably, almost certainly the most famous passage from the book, but I would argue one of the most famous passages from contemporary literature, certainly not from literature as a whole, but contemporary American literature. I would say this is probably one of the most famous passages. Okay. There was only one catch, and that was Catch-22, which specified that a concern for one's own safety in the face of dangers that were real and immediate was the process of a rational mind. Orr was crazy and could be grounded. All he had to do was ask, and as soon as he did, he would no longer be crazy and would have to fly more missions. Orr would be crazy to fly more missions, and sane if he didn't. But if he was sane, he had to fly them. If he flew them, then he was crazy and didn't have to. But if he didn't want to, he was sane and had to. So, basically, you can't go home unless you're declared insane. But if you claim to be insane, then you must have a concern for your own safety that only a sane person would have, and thus are ineligible to fly home. So, the big thing, I don't want to say thing, but one of the major points of this passage and this catch in general, which comes up a number of times throughout the book, is that they have an appreciation for this. We can sort of accept this as the rule, and it makes sense to us, even though it's not logically sound. So, like, the passage itself follows with, Yossarian was moved very deeply by the absolute simplicity of this clause of Catch-22 and let out a respectful whistle. That's some catch, that Catch-22, he observed. It's the best there is, Dr. Nika agreed. And let's see. Yossarian saw it clearly in all its spinning reasonableness. There was an elliptical precision about its perfect pairs of parts that was graceful and shocking, like good modern art, and at times Yossarian wasn't quite sure that he saw it all, just in the way he was never quite sure about good modern art, about the flies Orr saw in Appleby's eyes. He had Orr's word to take for the flies in Appleby's eyes. So, again, they're almost in awe of this, even though they recognize that it's not logically sound, and they recognize that it's not only kind of silly, but kind of serious, because if someone was legitimately insane, they would have no way to get out of their service for these purposes. And it also sort of goes along with the themes of bureaucracy and how bureaucracy can use words to trap us into things that it wants us to do. And this is another huge theme throughout the book, is the theme of bureaucracy and its control over our lives. And it's a little bit of a silly thing here, but as the book goes on, again, this becomes more of a pattern, and you sort of begin to realize how scary it really is, because this is a war situation. So the way that bureaucracy twists things is forcing real men into dangerous situations. So, and let's see. The other bit that I like is from the beginning. First chapter. I am just going to read the first of this page and that page, even though, so this is my favorite part, but since it's the second page, I think I might as well just read both pages and talk about both parts. It was love at first sight. The first time Yossarian saw the chaplain, he fell madly in love with him. Yossarian was in the hospital with a pain in his liver that felt just short of being jaundice. The doctors were puzzled by the fact that it wasn't quite jaundice. If it became jaundice, they could treat it. If it didn't become jaundice and went away, they could discharge him. But this just being short of jaundice all the time confused them. Each morning they came around, 3 brisk and serious men with efficient mouths and inefficient eyes, accompanied by brisk and serious Nurse Duckett, one of the ward nurses who didn't like Yossarian. They read the chart at the foot of the bed and asked impatiently about the pain. He seemed irritated when he told them that it was exactly the same. Still no movement? The full colonel demanded. The doctors just exchanged a look when he shook his head. Give him another pill. Nurse Duckett made a note to give Yossarian another pill, and the 4 of them moved along to the next bed. None of the nurses liked Yossarian. Actually, the pain in his liver had gone away, but Yossarian didn't say anything, and the doctors never suspected. They just suspected that he had been moving his bowels and not telling anyone. Yossarian had everything he wanted in the hospital. The food wasn't too bad, and his meals were brought to him in bed. There were extra rations of fresh meat, and during the hot part of the afternoon, he and the others were served chilled fruit juice or chilled chocolate milk. Apart from the doctors and the nurses, no one ever disturbed him. For a little while in the morning, he had to censor letters, but he was free after that to spend the rest of each day lying around idly with a clear conscience. He was comfortable in the hospital, and it was easy to stay on because he always ran a temperature of 101. He was even more comfortable than Dunbar, who had to keep falling down on his face in order to get his meals brought to him in bed. After he made up his mind to spend the rest of the war in the hospital, Yossarian wrote letters to everyone he knew saying he was in the hospital, but never mentioning why. One day he had a better idea. To everyone he knew, he wrote that he was going on a very dangerous mission. They asked for volunteers. It's very dangerous, but someone has to do it. I'll write you the instant I get back. And he had not written anyone since. All the officer patients in the ward were forced to censor letters written by all the enlisted men patients who were kept in residence and wards of their own. It was a monotonous job, and Yossarian was disappointed to learn that the lives of enlisted men were only slightly more interesting than the lives of the officers. After the first day, he had no curiosity at all. To break the monotony, he invented games. Death to all modifiers, he declared one day, and out of every letter that passed through his hands went every adverb and every adjective. The next day, he made a war on articles. He reached a much higher plane of creativity the following day, when he blacked out everything in the letters but a, an, and the. That erected a more dynamic interlinear tensions, he felt, and in just about every case left a message far more universal. Soon he was prescribing parts of salutations and signatures and leaving the text untouched. One time he blacked out all but the salutation, "Dear Mary," from a letter, and at the top he wrote, "I yearn for you tragically. A.T. Tapman, Chaplain, U.S. Army." A.T. Tapman was the group chaplain's name. When he had exhausted all possibilities in the letters, he began attacking the names and addresses on the envelopes, obliterating whole homes and streets, annihilating entire metropolises with careless flicks of his wrist, as though he were God. Catch-22 required that each censored letter bear the censoring officer's name. Most letters he didn't read at all. On those he didn't read at all, he wrote his own name. On those he did read, he wrote Washington Irving. When that grew monotonous, he wrote Irving Washington. Censoring the envelopes had serious repercussions, produced a ripple of anxiety on some ethereal military echelon that floated a CID man into the ward posing as a patient. They all knew he was a CID man because he kept inquiring about an officer named Irving or Washington, and because after his first day there he wouldn't censor letters. He found them too monotonous. So, basically this character, Yossarian, who's the main character, censors letters while he's in the hospital, and he's in there because he, as the beginning says, is sort of faking his liver pain in order to get out of fighting. So, in lieu of the Catch-22, he's realized that if he manages to fake sick for long enough, he can get out of fighting in the war without having to be declared insane. And since he's so bored in the hospital, he just goes about censoring letters. One of the other major themes that this points at is that nobody is really concerned with the war itself. Like, later in the book, as you go on, it's quite a large book. It's 400 and some odd pages, but as you learn more about other characters and people who are at war, generals and stuff, you notice that the generals just want a promotion and the troops just want to stay alive long enough to go home. Nobody's really concerned with the politics of the war or with the ethical implications of the war. And especially you notice with this whole censoring thing, but in general, there's a lot of this sort of silliness. And part of that is because the characters really feel like there's no meaning to anything they're doing. There's a complete disconnect from, like I said, the ethical and political implications, but because of that, everything they do feels meaningless. Especially with the bombardiers, where you're just flying a plane, dropping a bomb, and, landing, and whatever. You're just kind of doing a lot of the same stuff, and nothing feels like it's changing, and again, it feels meaningless. And in a world where nothing seems to make sense, nonsense almost becomes one of their values. Again, you notice this most directly right off the bat with the censorship, where he's sort of just playing games and not taking it seriously at all, because it's not serious and it doesn't mean anything, at least to him. And the book as a whole satirizes this and further satirizes some of the dehumanizing aspects of war and bureaucracy. And these bits, I guess, don't show as much about the actual war as is shown later in the book. But certainly with bureaucracy, with Catch-22 and having them censor the letters, and, the fact that doctors can't prove he's not sick, so they have to keep him there, but the moment that his pain goes away, he's gonna get kicked out. They're not gonna do any checkups to make sure that he's really okay. It's just, you're not in pain, and therefore you don't have jaundice, and therefore you're out. So, I think, I'm not normally into war literature all that much. It's not exactly my field. But I really like this book, and admittedly, I haven't made it through the full thing. But, I really like the sense of humor, the playfulness, the willingness to satirize and sort of poke at something that, this was written, it was published in 1961, so it was written maybe even before the 60s, about the war. And normally, part of the reason why there's so much in terms of war literature and books about the war and stuff like that is because it's a heavy, heavy subject and had a huge effect on so many people. So taking such a heavy subject and poking fun at it is a really bold move, and that's probably part of why this has become such, like, an icon in contemporary American literature, is because it's bold. So, if you are into satire, war, humor, anything that makes fun of the system or makes fun of bureaucracy, you're probably really gonna like this book. So, yeah. Let me know if any of you have read this book. It's a pretty common book for high school English class too. I almost read it in one of my classes. We ended up reading 1984 instead, but I've been revisiting some of the books I read in high school lately. So let me know, what was your favorite book that you read in high school? Or even just favorite contemporary novel, and I'll say contemporary as being written in the last 100 years or so. So, do you have a favorite contemporary novel? If so, let me know which one in the comments below. I want to do more contemporary literature, classics in general, but I feel like I tend towards either modern or way old literature, like Shakespeare era, stuff like that. I want to fill in the gaps, so let me know what your favorites are, and maybe I'll take a peek, do it for a future video. If you have any recommendations or books that you'd like me to look at or read an excerpt from, I am definitely willing. I get a lot of requests for poetry, but not too many for prose. So, yeah, there you go, and I'll see you guys next time.